Good morning, and now I want to welcome Reverend Chris to speak for us this morning.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, New Thought Spiritual Community of Eastern Long Island, for inviting me today. It's truly an honor. As good truth students that we are, we strive in our lives to reach a higher consciousness. In unity, we call this the Christ consciousness, and in other traditions, we call this enlightenment. This means we strive to be in this higher state. Now, why do we want to be in this higher state, you might ask? Because being in this state leads us to joy, love, and peace. And who does not want that? When you pray or meditate, you're simulating this higher state. The trick is to let go and accept what is. What we're doing is we are switching out of the ego consciousness into the divine consciousness. Acceptance is the key part of reaching this higher state. Eric Butterworth, Unity minister and author, says that unity is a one-word religion, consciousness. And I would say that all of New Thought is this one-word religion. So when we are striving for this higher consciousness, we're transcending our impulsive ego behavior that is based in fear to a divine nature based in love. The key to this higher state is to look at a bigger picture, change to a higher viewpoint. Because in life and our ego nature, we like to live our everyday dramas and we get caught up in the muckety muck of life. That is why reality shows, sports, MSNBC, Fox News, Twitter, and Facebook exist. They play into the dramas of our lives, and our ego mind just loves that. Let's look at a Bible story that demonstrates the ego mind and a higher viewpoint. It's the story of Zacchaeus found in Luke chapter 19, 1 through 10. Jesus is entering Jericho, and there's a crowd of people wanting to see him. One man in particular, who is described short in stature, named Zacchaeus, a tax collector, wants to see Jesus, but he can't. So he climbs a tree to get a better view. As he is on this tree, Jesus tells Zacchaeus to come down because he's having supper at Zacchaeus' house. At the end of it, Zacchaeus is transformed and he decides to give up half his fortune and make restitution to all that he has defrauded in his life. Now let's unpack this story metaphysically for a minute. Remember, when we do a metaphysical Bible interpretation, we're looking at the hidden truth in a story. Jesus represents higher consciousness. Jericho represents a material city, ego-driven. Zacchaeus is a tax collector, a material person, but he climbs a tree, and the tree connects between the material world and the spiritual world, a lower state of consciousness to a higher state of consciousness. And as Zacchaeus is climbing the tree, he's going to a higher state of consciousness. He has a higher point of view. And this is transforming his way of thinking. So when we look in a higher view, our perception changes. Now notice Jesus is walking into an environment that has a lower consciousness, and he's inviting himself to dine with someone with a lower consciousness. Jesus does not dive into the mud here. He is above this state, and he is inviting someone to this higher state with him. And this is what it means by I'm inviting myself to your house for supper in the story. He's demonstrating acceptance in the higher state. He knows who Zacchaeus is, accepts him anyway. He does not get involved in what others think of a tax collector and all the drama and ego that goes with it. It reminds me of the teaching of the lotus flower. The lotus flower is perhaps one of the most beautiful flowers on earth, yet it has its roots in the mud. It accepts its environment in the mud, but does not take the form of the mud. It takes the form of a flower. We are the lotuses in the mud. Lower consciousness surrounds us. Do we accept the mud, or do we accept the divine creations we are? Our choice. See, we dive into the mud because we accept the drama or the lower vibration that surrounds us, or we can choose and accept our divine nature. This gets me to the definition of acceptance. Traditionally, acceptance is defined as a favorable reception, approval, favor, or the act of receiving something that is offered. But I'd like to offer a different definition today. Acceptance is an understanding in the mind linked with the ability to let go of resistance. So the first thing is to change the mind, and the second is to let go of resistance so that understanding can take place. We resist all the time, and that is what the small mind likes to do. We want a person to be a certain way. We want a situation to be a certain way. We want to be a certain way, and we drive ourselves nuts. I'd like to give an example of this. A friend of mine has a sister who's getting married in 5 weeks. My friend received an invitation for the wedding ceremony and reception. My friend got crazy. He lost his sanity. He could not believe his sister would ask people to put themselves at risk during this time of COVID. He wishes his sister would be different, but as we explored his sister's past behavior, she has a pattern that would lend itself to doing this type of behavior. Now let's take a higher view. There's nothing my friend can do other than stew, lose his sanity, and drive himself further into the abyss. This is who his sister is. This is her pattern. We all have patterns of behavior, and this is his sister's. He's having difficulty accepting his sister's behavior, and it's driving him nuts. He's diving into the mud. Are you the lotus, or are you the mud? It's time to take out the new thought toolbox for the SOS of acceptance, which stands for Save Our Sanity. You see, if we stay in the lower state of I have to fix this, or I can't believe my sister is doing this mindset, we're digging ourselves into the abyss and driving ourselves crazy. Let's face it, there are people in our lives that are going to drive us crazy. Heck, Jesus could have played the judgment game about Zacchaeus. After all, he defrauded people. But he took a higher view and did not judge, but accepted who Zacchaeus is. It brings to mind the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. My friend should know he cannot change his sister. I suggested to him he needs to accept that. He made the courageous decision of not going to the wedding. This is courage. He doesn't have to buy into the crazy situation. The problem is diving yourself into the mud and not accepting who his sister is. So let's unpack the wisdom of the SOS of acceptance and bring us back to sanity. In other words, save our sanity. Let's remember the definition of acceptance. Understanding in the mind linked with the ability to let go of resistance. This is helping you take a higher view. We can unpack this by a couple of acronyms of SOS. We already said the SOS of acceptance is save our sanity, but I offer two more. The second is stop, offer, sit. First is to realize your mind is spinning and say to yourself, stop, offer yourself a treatment. And third, sit with that treatment. In short, SOS is stop, offer, sit. This will save our sanity. Now, let's explore another SOS when we're talking about the first one, which is stop. Self, other, situation. Ask yourself, what is bothering you here? Is it something about you, yourself? Is it something about the other? Or is it something about the situation? In the above example with my friend, we can say it could be all three. He feels helpless and wants to fix it. This is himself. He's upset with his sister, another. And he's upset with a wedding and a pandemic, the situation. Now you're clear with what is driving you crazy. Now offer a treatment or prayer. Devise a prayer that speaks to the upset. And what you're doing here when you're praying is you're changing the station here. You're changing from ego consciousness to divine consciousness. So devise a prayer that speaks to the upset. In this case, all three apply. So here's a sample prayer. I call on divine guidance to let me see rightly in the situation. I release all of the emotion, hurt, and anger I have towards myself, my sister, and the situation. I see the right and perfect outcome unfolding for my sister and my family. So as you see, you use the stop part to help you create a prayer for the offer part. And now the sit part. As your mind brings you back to the crazy, go back to the prayer and focus on the elements. Maybe you want to focus on, I release the anger, or I see the right and perfect outcome. Just because you write a prayer and offer it does not mean you do not have to work on it. This is the active sit part. I mentioned before about understanding. Understand you cannot change the other person or the situation. What you can change is how you think about it. Acceptance saves our sanity. And because we are truth students, it elevates our consciousness. Remember, the crazy person that you are seeing is just you in a different consciousness. Our work is to accept where the person is. I bet if you look long enough, you can probably see, oh, I did something similar a few days back, a few weeks back, or months or years back. Acceptance is the key to higher consciousness. It is allowing you to take a different view. It is releasing the resistance. Remember the old saying, what you resist persists. Before we end, a word about ego consciousness. The ego is not the enemy. It does good things in our lives. We need the ego sometimes to say no, and sometimes we have to resist our impulses. But do not let the ego drive your car. It's a tool. It helps you navigate life. The problem with most of us is we do not know the difference of who is driving the car. Is it the ego, the world of judgment, non-forgiveness, crazy impulses? Or is it the divine consciousness full of love, acceptance, and forgiveness? So on our way to this higher consciousness where love rules, accept what is and discern what you can control and what you cannot control. Remember, acceptance is our SOS in life. Thank you.